17 seconds. That's how long a reactor core takes to go from a locked passive trigger to plasma once someone decides the countdown should run. I watched those red digits fall across a screen the width of a door, and I understood, for the only time in my long service, what prey feels like in the last moment before the jaws close. I still count backward from 17 when I can't sleep. 6 months before that night, we owned 3/4 of known space and believed the number would only grow. 16 species crowded a war table built for exactly this kind of self-congratulation. High Arbiter Yelix put the question to the room like a toast. Who precisely was left to stop us? The chamber laughed, the Brent barking low, the Skrell chittering high, the Delin bubbling in that wet way they do when something strikes them funny. I laughed with them. 14 systems had fallen that rotation alone. Kelix, the nervous little parvon who logged every casualty we caused like it mattered to someone, mentioned that the Terran Union had sent 3 requests asking us to stop hitting neutral shipping. General Thraxon didn't look up from his glass. Taking what isn't yours is the whole of conquest, he said. Somebody explain that to the human. We were still laughing when the alarms stopped being funny. Not the combat siren, the other one, the one that means something has already gotten past every layer we built. A single frigate had crossed our entire defensive grid without lighting a sensor, and by the time Tactical finished saying she's docked, she had already cut through port 73 and was walking our corridors alone. The chamber door didn't get breached. It opened, calm as a courtesy, on a lock coded to 16 genetic signatures, none of them hers. She was small, that's what struck me first, smaller than half the guards she'd already walked past. Plain black fatigues, no armor, hair tied back, a face that had nothing to do with confidence and everything to do with certainty. Her boots were wet, not with rain. Evening, she said, like she'd wandered into the wrong meeting by accident. Captain Elena Kess, Terran Union, you've been letting our calls go to static. Thraxon went for her before anyone could answer. 300 pounds of muscle and claws, a lunge that had ended better fighters than her. She didn't retreat. She stepped inside the reach of it, caught his wrist, and bent his elbow somewhere elbows aren't built to go. He was on the floor with a crushed throat before the rest of us finished flinching. She stepped over him and looked around the table, meeting every pair of eyes in turn, and something old in my chest told me that raising my rifle would be the last decision I ever made. You asked who'd stop you, she said. I'm here to correct the record instead. She laid it out plainly, 14,000 dead along her people's trade lanes, 3 colonies burned to glass, all of it recorded on a channel she'd apparently been listening to for months. Then she told us what stood behind her. 2 million operators bred and drilled on a world so hostile that everything on it had spent 10,000 years learning to kill everything else, until the survivors turned that instinct into something with a flag and a chain of command. A fraction of 1% of their population. A death world's answer to an empire that had never once been hunted on its own ground. None of us believed her yet. Then she opened a file. The footage was 2 days old. A settlement under twin moons, researchers and their families going about an ordinary afternoon, until the strikes began, unhurried, methodical, taking the place apart building by building. 37 seconds. When it ended, the silence in that chamber was heavier than anything 16 species had ever managed together. New Beijing, she said, and every trace of pleasantness left her voice. Botanists mostly, 347 dead, 82 of them under 10 years old. Your fleet did that yesterday, and someone filed it as a neutralized installation. I hadn't known. Most of us hadn't. The reports never mentioned the children. She gave us 72 hours to clear neutral space, then told us, almost gently, that her ship had a passive lock on our reactor, and that if she didn't check in within 6 hours, it would fire on its own. The countdown started there. 17 seconds, bleeding red across every screen on the station, while Yelix's voice cracked out a full retreat to 1,000 ships at once. That's the number I keep. Not the war we lost, not the treaty we signed after, that number, falling, while I understood for the first time what it meant to be hunted. She thanked us when it reached 0, said she had 4 more stops that day. Then the channel went dead and she was gone, and the finest military minds of 16 species sat there, fully armed, thoroughly afraid of someone who'd already left the building. 2 days later, they called us to neutral ground to hear terms. I expected a firing squad wearing diplomacy as a disguise. What I got was worse. An admiral named Hunt put up a star chart and showed us, without raising his voice, that his fleet could reach every world we held within 6 weeks using nothing exotic. And within a week, if his people reached for the things they'd built once and sworn never to use again. Then a quiet woman beside him, a doctor named Meta, told us something that mattered more than any threat. Humans weren't dangerous because they'd always been predators, she said. They were dangerous because some buried part of them still remembered being hunted and had sworn it would never happen to their children again. Every war they'd survived, every near extinction on their own world, had been building toward the exact moment we handed them a reason to stop being patient. That was the moment the room actually broke. Not the reactor countdown, not Thraxon's ruined throat, this. Yelix's shimmer went the color of surrender before she'd said a word. Bren, the hawk warrior who'd laughed loudest at the start, put both hands flat on the table like he needed it to stay upright. I felt something give way in my own chest, the last of the certainty I'd carried into that room 6 months earlier. You asked who'd stop you, Kess said, standing now, letting all of us actually look at her. We never wanted to. We want you to stop yourselves. Every species reaches this point, strong enough to be dangerous, sure enough of itself to think that's the same as being safe. Some grow past it. Some get found by something worse than us, out past the borders anyone's mapped, drawn in by exactly this much noise. Nobody argued the terms after that. Withdrawal, reparations, observers on every operation we ran from that day forward. I put my signature to it because the alternative wasn't a war we could lose. It was a war that simply stopped being fought at all, the way a fire stops being a fire once the air's gone. Kess left before the ink dried, back to wherever her kind go between assignments. I heard, much later, that her own commanding officer asked her afterward how she was holding up, and that she told him the truth instead of the answer they train operators to give, that she remembered every one of the dead she'd failed to save, and none of the guards she'd put down to get to us. He told her that was the day she'd stopped being what we feared becoming, and sent her home for 2 weeks she probably didn't take. I kept a piece of that frozen countdown display, salvaged years later from the station we finally decommissioned. It sits on my desk now, dark. The numbers stopped mid-fall. I don't need it lit to remember what came after the 6. We had asked who would stop us. She never argued the point, never raised her voice past a conversational pitch. She simply set the truth down in front of us, still wet on her boots, and let 16 species do the arithmetic for themselves.